Hey y'all, I'm the captain, and this is Sailing on the Spectrum, where I talk about the challenges growing up with autism spectrum disorder. Welcome aboard. Today's episode of SOS is going to be epic. Going to get deep and personal. Today's title, I think, will be Being Misunderstood. That's something that is a challenge for many of us on the spectrum, nearly everybody on the spectrum. We feel misunderstood, and we are misunderstood. I went through all my years growing up kind of in middle and high school, and then college and young adulthood. Really a lot of my young adulthood, just not really knowing how I fit into the scheme of things when it came to developing, friendships, but just getting on with people in general and knowing quite how I fit into the scheme of things with everybody. I went through middle and high school having never really had a one-on-one date or be able to have much one-on-one talks with girls. It's not that I didn't want to, and it's not that I didn't talk to any girls at all, but oftentimes it was extremely challenging, and it could take a lot out of me because I didn't know how I was coming across, and I didn't know how to come across at all. That's one of the challenges when you're on the spectrum. Being able to interact with people is just something that seems does not come natural. And I know that during college, I struggled because, of course, I had a new set of friends, by then, and I came out of high school never really having anybody to grab on to as a friend in a permanent way. And I kind of went through college that way too. I had friends, and I wasn't totally alone, but I definitely felt like I felt like an alien amongst my peers in pretty much every situation. During college, well, let me back up a tad. I went to middle and high school at a Christian private middle and high school. And then I went to a college that was affiliated with this. Actually, the middle and high school was affiliated with this college, this Bible college I ended up going to. And so I was really spent a lot of my years around the same stomping ground. And I still just didn't really feel like I fit in very well, But it didn't help that I, had experiences where I was bullied at times. I wasn't really bullied much during college, I guess during middle and maybe a little bit of high school, I had some bullying, and I definitely did when I was much younger. But by the time I was in college, I did go into situations where I ended up working around a lot of children. We had at our Bible college thing where students each had to do sort of a ministries placement of sorts where they got to do work in some area, and I just ended up working at my church helping kids with their activities on Wednesday nights. And I was working with the boys, but of course you'd cross paths with all manner of kids, boy, girl, and a lot of the youth. And so I'd be interacting with them kind of on a regular basis. And I seemed to be fitting in okay doing that. I was doing it kind of because I didn't know where else I needed to be, and that's kind of where I was, I guess, funneled. And it worked out all right, but obviously being a guy in my mid-20s and being a bachelor and not really having any, I guess, anywhere to go as far as knowing, kind of feeling like I was alienated amongst my peers. There I was working with kids, and I just felt out of place. I have to say though, I managed to get on with kids in a way that was pretty good. And a lot of people thought that that I did well with them. It felt good to feel validated in that sense, because I didn't always feel validated amongst my peers. And it's not because none of my peers were ever good to me or anything, but I just didn't feel always the most comfortable around them or the most natural around them, because I never did with anybody. And so goes life on the spectrum. Well, all I know is I worked with the kids and was, going through college, doing my thing. I remember at one point being called into the associate pastor's office, and he had to basically say to me that there was a parent or two that had issue with me for some reason. And it was a kind of conversation that really scared me to death, because I was told that a certain parent or two that he wouldn't name said that they seemed to kind of be uncomfortable with the way that I was interacting with kids that I was around. And it just kind of made my skin crawl. And so I kind of didn't know what to do with that, except say, look, I'm conscious of that and I'm guarding my steps. And I think the associate pastor really felt the same way. I think he was just kind of caught in the middle and didn't want this parent to, keep suspecting the wrong thing. It's the kind of thing that really it's almost like I have to remember it in a blur, because it really stung me. But because there I was already feeling kind of out of place really among people in general, but there I was kind of doing the things I needed to do, doing my help with the kids and their activities, and then I hear this and I'm just absolutely mortified. Well, this actually happened twice. I think maybe a year or so went by, or a year or two. And all I know is after the second time, I basically said, all right, well, that's it. I'm done with this. And besides, I guess my ministry placement requirement was about up by then. For that matter, so was my college. Well, as a side note, around that final year of college, I did meet this one girl at my college who I really thought was especially nice. And she seemed to be really sweet to me. And I really felt like there was something about her. I remember telling a guy friend of mine not long before I was about to graduate, there's a couple of girls this year I've met that I've never thought I could say this before about other girls I knew, but I could honestly see myself being married to them. And I knew this woman in particular was one of them. Well, sure enough, I didn't really get a chance to ask her out, and I was already kind of feeling awkward enough anyways, and I was afraid I might blow it with her. Of course, blow it with her. Either way. But I just knew that that opportunity was another one that was missed as far as I was concerned, because I didn't get to ask her out. I did get to talk to her some, and there was something that's really special about whenever I talked to her. She seemed to really be genuinely nice and seemed to think that I was all right, maybe in a way that others didn't for some reason. Well, Maybe I just chalked it up as her being overly nice to me just out of pity, like I always thought, because I just didn't feel worthy. Well, college had come and gone. I was out on my own. I started working because I didn't know where else to go. I started working at my church again, only this time I was working as kind of there was a side, as it were, a side ministry or a side outreach that they did where they had community sports leagues for kids. They ran this thing, and it was good, and I had plenty of work to do there. I was making money, and I was also working part-time at the high school where I used to go. That was kind of a side affiliate of the college I had gone to as well. The guy who ran the dining rooms there is a guy who I'd worked for some as a student. I ended up working there part-time at the high school for him. Turned out great, but sure enough, there I was working amongst kids again, and there I was, a bachelor out of college in my mid-20s, and I just felt kind of, as I did everywhere else, I felt like a fish out of water. Well, I seemed to get on pretty all right. I ended up working full-time at the high school, in the dining room, just doing my thing, just cleaning dishes and washing pans every day, and just cleaning up after everybody's mess. And that can be a lot of work to do at middle school and high school. Well, I guess there was a rapport that I came to develop, with some of the kids, and it felt good. But even so, I was always consciously aware of me being a bachelor in my mid-20s, and a guy, working and being amongst kids that were that young. And I knew I needed to be somewhat conscious of how I looked and how I behaved. And I guess it was hard enough, because being on the spectrum, a lot of us can inwardly can sometimes be very self-conscious about how we come across to people. And that's a challenge, and that's one of the reasons it was very challenging, and it took a lot out of me to be able to relate to my peers, and much less even try to relate to a girl with whom I could try to develop a potential romance. It was something that just seemed so out of my league, and something that I almost felt unworthy of, and that was hard. And I guess a lot of the challenges I had, even as a young kid, I guess I had a backlog of experiences that never gave me confidence. Obviously, because I was bullied, I was, I just didn't really feel like I had much of a nod of confidence from a lot of people. And that wasn't necessarily the case. It's just that I couldn't always feel it or see it. And, but there I was, working day in and day out amongst teenagers, just doing my thing, and just trying to be as much of a grown-up as I knew how to be at that point in my life. And that's something that I've said in another video. Adulting is something that's kind of a scary thing for a lot of us on the spectrum. It can be scary for a lot of people, but especially on the spectrum, you have the added challenges. But I would say a few years went by, and one day I had another conversation that my boss had with me about, I think there was some adult, I guess somewhere, a parent or somebody who was having issues with me, and thought that maybe a time that I innocently had talked, or was being talked with, or talking to a certain student or students, had issue with me, and thought that I was kind of acting a little suspicious. And it just got scary again, because I knew my boss didn't think that I was ever somebody who was going to act predatorial towards kids or anything, or anybody who I ought not to be. But just the fact that anybody out there thought that scared me to death. And I guess maybe the experience again is kind of blurred in my head because it was kind of traumatic at the time. At the time, it just, I think, invoked inwardly some rage because I knew I wasn't being looked at or treated fairly, but I just had to go back to work every day and just guarding my steps and not knowing if I made a misstep or if I said hi to the wrong person or if I stepped in the wrong corner of a room, that I was going to be thought that I was up to no good. And so it got really taxing, I think, even though I really knew how to mask it. So I think at the beginning of one school year, though, there was, for whatever reason, this group of 7th grade girls who, I don't know, they all seemed to just kind of think I was just the cat's pajamas, you know how it is. And again, it was cool, and I knew how to be nice and reciprocate and say, hey, y'all cool and stuff, but, and, you know, I guess maybe I just didn't know how to avoid situations where, you know, I might be talking to them and somebody would look at me and think that I was up to no good, or somebody who was probably not the appropriate person to be talking to them. And so, because I guess I just didn't really have the natural ability to see that. But all I know is I wasn't anyone to do anything or say anything to anybody that would be coming off as a predator or coming off as somebody who had a bad agenda. But I just couldn't be sure if there was 1 or 2 or 3 people out there who maybe thought otherwise, and that was disturbing. But sure enough, the middle school principal had a conversation with me, lo and behold, and I think this happened a few times within the span of a few weeks, and it came to be that there was this one dad in particular who was the dad of one of these, I guess, giddy girls who were just, you know, I guess just kind of was saying hi to me and all those kinds of things, and I guess thought that somehow I needed to be told that I couldn't talk to her, his daughter, and I didn't even know who it was. This dad never said anything to me, but sure enough, it got so bad that my boss, of course, found out about it and said basically, look, if you need to just come to work at the college dining room where I'd worked some before, why don't you come work up there? And I said, you know what, that's probably a good idea, because I knew I didn't need to be working in the middle and high school anymore. And so it actually got to where the middle school principal actually gave that dad an opportunity to talk to me in his office. I don't know why I ever bothered to go there and speak with this man, because it just basically was a waste of time for 30 minutes hearing him talk about how he just didn't think thought that I was bad news and all that stuff. All I could take from that was, hey, if I never see you again, it won't bother me. See you or your daughter or anybody for that matter around here, if that's what it means. Because I was done with it. Well, a couple of years went by and I'd been working at the college, at the same college where I'd been, Bible college where I'd been. Turns out, after a year or so, a few guys from the high school came over to work with me, and they were a bit on the obnoxious side. I could work with them all right, but then it got to be, or one of them in particular was especially awful. And he was that way to everybody. He was one of those bully types. And you have to understand, this kid was probably half my age. But he had no problem pushing me around a little bit and just making complete, a complete nuisance of himself in every way he possibly could. And the other guys, buddies from the school who also worked in the dining room with as well in the afternoons, they were the same way. At least two of them were. And I just remember one day, let me mention this. This one kid that I mentioned, who was the worst of them, he actually had been online and tried to put some inappropriate stuff about one of the principals at the school, at the high school, and say that this principal was messing around with boys and stuff like that. And he, for the life of me, I can't understand how he didn't get expelled for that. But that's another story. All I know is that there he was working with me at the dining room at CIU, doing some work in the afternoons, and then he was giving me grief. And knowing what had gone down at the school a couple of years before really made me worry about stuff that maybe he had heard, or that maybe people had been spreading over there about me. Well, one day I was walking by, and he just started teasing me and said, "Hey, yo, where's your pedophile beard and your pedophile glasses and all that?" Whatever he said, all I know was I heard the word pedophile, and that set me off. And I just didn't know I didn't know what to do. I just ran up to him and started to twist his arm, and I'm just like, how about I just twist your arm off right now? I just was so angry, and then I just walked out, and I didn't know what to do or say. I think something about what had gone down at the school a couple years before, and then hearing that from him, made me scared to death of what he and others might have been saying about me over there. And I felt like I was just going to be a vagrant. I was back to being a vagrant. And that everywhere I'd go, I'd have that label. I felt like a social vagrant, and now here I am feeling like a sexual vagrant. I've been seeing a lot of my peers, not all of them, but a lot of them, dating and then getting married. There were several of my cousins who were younger than me who had already been getting married at that point. I don't think any of them got married just to rub my face in anything. Obviously, they didn't do that. But it just, from the place where I was, from my vantage point, it just, I guess, made me feel more and more left behind. But then here I am being called a pedophile by some high school kid who is just an obnoxious piece of crap to everybody, and who shouldn't even be at that high school anymore, considering what the stuff he's been doing. So I just had reached a low. Well, I should tell you, even though I felt alienated amongst my peers, and even though I'd come through college, and even though I'd been a bachelor into my late 20s, feeling lost among my peers, and having come out with through high school and college with hardly any lasting friendships, guy or girl, there were people along the way who knew and understood me. And it was hard to hear their encouragement over those others and those other experiences that I'd had. There was one girl that I got to know a little bit after I graduated college. Not the one I got to know during my last year. I'll get to that in a minute. But she was one who I actually did get to go on a couple of, I guess, informal dates with. And she was very encouraging. And during those experiences, and at least one of those experiences that I mentioned earlier, she was a real encouragement. She felt terribly for me. I ended up getting to go visit her family. They actually invited me to come and visit them. And at this point, this girl was already engaged. But it felt good to kind of, just get to come and visit as a friend, you know. And that happened the summer after all this nonsense about being called a pedophile happened and stuff like that. I have to say, my confidence was starting to be built, and some of the pieces of my broken confidence were being put back together by others who really knew and understood me. And I was thankful for that. But all I know is the year after I had been called a pedophile and all that, after years of just, being on, I guess, Facebook and stuff like that, there was one who I'd gotten to know that I got reconnected with on Facebook, who happened to be the girl that I met the last year I was in college. And in early 2011, I had just noticed she had started to post again because she wasn't on there much. And I said, hey, maybe I could come by, because where she lived, I drove through there on the way to visit my parents who were in Florida at the time. And on the way down there, I offered maybe to go and see her and have coffee. Well, she thought that would be great. And we ended up interacting a little bit more over the next several days, and that turned into phone conversations, and that turned into a visit to her family, and that turned into dating. And then later that year, it turned into getting married. We'll have been married 10 years this coming fall. And earlier this month, I celebrated my little girl's 6th birthday. And I got her a scooter. And I got one for myself too. And I just came in back in the house from going out and riding with her down the street. Me, the guy who was social and seemingly sexual, felt like a sexual vagrant who got called a pedophile. There is a message of hope. Obviously, that's the message. That people who are on the spectrum, who feel vagrant in many ways, and who don't know where they fit, there is hope. You'll find your place. It may take time. I was in my early 30s when I finally met my mate and got married. It was a long wait, but it was worth it. And just because it doesn't feel like it'll ever happen doesn't mean it won't. There's a lot of things we feel these days that may never happen, like us being able to be around big groups again, but they will happen. With this pandemic going on, things can happen, and there is hope. I know for me, I had to lean on, it helped me to recognize what true friends are. You find out who your friends are when things like that happen. Things like I've been through, and things like all of us are going through right now. And I also find out how much I really need and how important it is for me to trust and believe in my Maker. I know not all of you out there may have that belief, but I know I do, even more so because of what I've been through, and because I know I've had to believe that there's somebody out there who knows and understands me better than anybody. And sure enough, I got to know somebody who's such a beautiful woman, and a little girl who is just 6 years old, but she puts her arms out and wants me to pick her up every day. And they understand me, and they love me, and they know me better than anything and anybody in the world. And my Maker helped make that happen. So If you're on the autism spectrum or you know somebody who is and they're misunderstood, do your best to understand them and get to know them and love them. Don't be afraid to go the extra mile with them, because it'll help them. It'll pull them out of their shell. I'm thankful for the ones that I know who did, who helped me. Just keep it in mind. All right? Thank you for joining me on this epic journey. I'm the captain, and I'll see you on our next voyage.